Imagine tonight you are lying calmly, your body slowly releasing all the tension that is gathered throughout the day, the air flowing gently against your skin, and your mind trying to leave behind the noise that usually fills the busyness of daily life. Listen to yourself as if there is nothing more to chase, nothing more to prove, only a quiet space created to guide you into an ancient story that comes from afar, from a time when the desert sands still held secrets that never ended. Tonight, let us walk slowly together, not to find answers, but to learn how to hear the echoes of the past. Echoes that are sometimes faint, sometimes clear, yet always carrying a sense of peace within their surrounding mystery. Take a slow breath, feel the stillness filling your chest, release it gently, and allow your body to grow lighter. There is no need to hurry, no obligation to remain awake. If your eyes wish to close, let them close naturally, for this story will continue to flow even as your awareness drifts into slumber. Think of every word as a small step in the desert, every pause as a breeze of desert wind across your face, and every sentence as a torch leading us toward doors, long sealed doors leading to tombs of shadows guarded by time itself. As these words flow, allow yourself to feel safe, comfortable, as though embraced by the long night, as though no secret could ever harm you. For tonight is not about unveiling the whole truth, but about allowing yourself to walk among the shadows of history, with calm steps, with a heart that slowly becomes still, and with a soul ready to sail into dreams. As your body grows lighter, and your mind slowly drifts away from the burdens of the day, imagine that you are walking along a long path, stretching endlessly before you. The path is made of fine sand, cool beneath the gentle touch of the moonlight that reveals each grain softly. Around you there is no noise of vehicles, no conversations pressing upon you, no demands from anyone. There is only the vast expanse that seems to be a stage for silence itself. The moon hangs in the sky, full yet calm, as if watching your steps patiently. Each step creates an echo not heard by the ears, but felt by the soul, an echo that guides you deeper into a realm beyond time. You are not in a hurry, and there is no destination waiting at the end of this path. The path itself is only a journey leading us closer to the story whispered by the desert. A story buried beneath layers of sand, guarded by the shadows of ancient tombs that have stood for thousands of years. Imagine also that along the path there are small torches burning, their orange glow trembling under the touch of the gentle night breeze. These torches are not meant to frighten you, but to mark that the road you walk is safe. Meanwhile, the stars scatter across the sky like fragments of light fallen from above, and you know that each star has been a witness to the journey of humankind across ages. Some of them shone when pharaohs ruled, when pyramids had just been raised, when workers shaped stone upon stone with hands scarred and weary. Those same stars witnessed how secrets were hidden, how tombs were sealed, and how the world slowly forgot the existence of the underground labyrinth that swallowed countless mysteries. Now, as you walk along this path, allow your mind to grow ever quieter. There's no need to judge or predict what may appear. Simply let yourself dissolve into stillness. Think of every desert breeze as a gentle hand brushing against your face. and each step as a bridge leading you closer into a world not easily understood. At times, the road may feel long, at times it may feel brief, but in every moment, you are learning to trust the flow of time carrying us towards something deeper. Tonight, you are not a spectator nor a ruler, but a wanderer invited to rest among the shadows of history, to listen without needing to control, to witness without needing to judge. The farther you walk, the thinner the boundary becomes between the real world and the one built by imagination. Your steps are no longer footsteps upon sand, but movements of awareness across layers of time. This path will lead us to the tale of the tombs of shadows, a world never fully revealed, yet always trembling in the minds of those who hear its name. So remain calm. Let this story be the melody guiding you, slowly, until your eyes grow heavier and your mind is ready to receive the whispers of buried secrets. Imagine that we are standing at the edge of time around 3,000 years before Christ in the land we now call Egypt. When the Nile River was the lifeline of existence and the star-filled sky was the guide for direction. At that time, the world did not know borders as we understand them today. There were no modern nations, no lines on maps dividing lands, only kingdoms that regarded themselves as the center of all that is. Ancient Egypt flourished along the Nile's waters that each year brought fertility, covering the soil with black silt that became the foundation of agriculture, and from there arose greatness that endured for millennia. Yet behind the splendor of pyramids, behind the great statues that still stand today, there were other tales. Rarely told stories of dark chambers beneath the ground of tombs. Not always filled with gold, but also with fear and secrets that did not wish to see the light of the sun. Ancient Greek historians who came centuries after this civilization flourished wrote that near the city of Crocodilopolis, or Arsino, there once stood a labyrinth so vast with chambers numbering in the thousands, each connected by corridors leading to the next. Herodotus, known as the father of history, described it as a structure more astonishing than the pyramids, for its complexity would cause anyone who entered to lose their way. He spoke of its walls adorned with carvings full of stories, and its underground chambers said to contain the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles once worshipped in that region. Yet to this day, no one has ever truly uncovered that labyrinth in its entirety, as if it had been swallowed by the earth, buried beneath layers of sand and water, or perhaps deliberately erased from the surface of the world so that it might remain a mystery. Imagine the silence of the night in that land, when the moon cast its glow upon stone walls and long shadows fell across the gates of temples. There were no electric lights, no machines, only the whisper of wind carrying the scent of dust, the sound of desert insects. And far beneath the ground, perhaps faint echoes of footsteps from ages past. It is in such places that the tombs of shadows found their form, not merely as spaces to hold bodies, but as corridors that swallowed stories, preserved records without letters, and became places where time itself ceased to move. No one knows how many workers were buried during the creation of those chambers. No one knows how many prayers were whispered into the stone walls. No one knows how many secrets were sealed behind layers of limestone. What we do know is only that the shadows still breathe, though faintly, though far from human sight. For modern wanderers standing on the plains of Fayum, or gazing upon the ruins of ancient temples, it is difficult to imagine that beneath their feet might lie vast networks of chambers, a labyrinth long lost to maps or tombs, whose walls still hold the faint fragrance of incense long extinguished. Yet, if you were to stand long enough there, if you were to close your eyes and let imagination pierce through the layers of soil, you would sense something watching, something that does not wish to be completely forgotten, something resembling a whisper from the past, calling with a voice that cannot be translated, only felt. And from this point, our story of the Tombs of Shadows will begin to move, slowly, with quiet steps, inviting you deeper still. Around the 20th century before Christ, during the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, the land around Fayum underwent massive construction, and many faint records speak of a colossal structure with thousands of chambers that has never been rediscovered in its entirety. Imagine a world without artificial light, where night was illuminated only by stars scattered across the sky, and each beam seemed a silent witness to what occurred on earth. The Nile continued to flow with its eternal rhythm, flooding the lowlands during inundation season, leaving behind fertile silt that gave life, yet also brought fear, for water could be both blessing and disaster. Behind all this, the ancient Egyptians built their subterranean world, perhaps to hide something, perhaps to guard spirits they deemed sacred, or simply to affirm that the power of their kings extended even into the belly of the earth. In Herodotus's records, it is said that the labyrinth had 2 levels, one above ground and one below, with chambers numbering 3,000. The upper rooms were said to be used for royal affairs and rituals, while the underground chambers held the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles. This description conjures not only a vision of monumental architecture, but also a realm of secrets. A place where sunlight never entered, and only the flicker of small torches might once have touched those stone walls. Imagine someone walking there, passing through narrow corridors with damp walls, thin air, and echoes of footsteps repeating stories from the distant past. No one can confirm whether that record is true, for no archaeological evidence has ever fully proven the labyrinth's existence. Yet precisely because of that, its mystery remains alive, preserved between ancient words and human imagination. Egypt was a land that made death part of daily life. Pyramids were built to immortalize kings, temples erected to worship gods, and tombs carved with meticulous detail, as though the journey to the afterlife was more important than life itself. If the labyrinth truly existed, it was perhaps not only a grand structure, but also a reflection of their view of the beyond. Those long corridors may have been designed to confuse evil spirits, or perhaps to ensure that only the chosen could reach the innermost chamber where the true secret was kept. No one really knows, and perhaps no one ever should. When modern archaeologists searched for clues, they discovered remains near Hawara, believed to be the labyrinth's site. Yet what they found were nothing more than ruined stone foundations, far from the majestic vision described by Herodotus. Whether the labyrinth was destroyed by time or deliberately buried by those who wished to erase its trace remains an unanswered question. But if we observe how ancient Egypt always embedded mystery in every creation, we might believe that what lies beneath the ground is far greater than what we have ever uncovered on the surface. There, In the silent darkness, the tombs of shadows may still stand, guarding secrets that can only be touched by imagination. When we speak of ancient Egypt, our minds often drift to the Great Pyramids of Giza, the silent Sphinx gazing at the horizon, or the Valley of the Kings that holds the tombs of pharaohs with all their treasures and grandeur. Yet beyond those central marvels lies a legend passed down from mouth to mouth. A tale of a colossal structure no less astonishing, said to be even larger and more intricate than the pyramids themselves. The Egyptian labyrinth, mentioned by ancient Greek historians, was described as a world within a world, a seemingly endless space where each step drew its visitors deeper into mystery. Herodotus, Strabo, and Pliny the Elder all wrote about it in differing ways, but they agreed it had once been real. Herodotus called it a wonder surpassing the pyramids. He described vast halls adorned with carvings, statues, and pillars stretching as far as the eye could see. Strabo added that the building had a roof of giant monolithic stones, arranged with a skill hard to imagine even with modern technology. Meanwhile, Pliny the Elder wrote of sections dedicated to certain gods, as though each room was a shrine in itself. From their accounts, we are given puzzle pieces that form a hazy image of a masterpiece of architecture, though none of them offered a precise map of its location or design. Like many ancient tales, it was left in the fog, waiting to be guessed at and reimagined by later generations. What is fascinating is how the legend endured through time even without solid physical evidence of its existence. Some archaeologists in the 19th century attempted to uncover the labyrinth, and some believed they found it near the Pyramid of Hawara, built by Amenhotep III of the 12th dynasty. The ruins that remain are merely fragments of foundations, crumbled mud brick, and scattered blocks of stone. Yet for those who believe, that was enough to imagine that what was seen was only the surface of something much greater still buried below. In this view, the labyrinth was never lost, merely asleep, waiting to be discovered by those willing to dig deeper, whether in the ground or in imagination. For the ancient Egyptians, underground space was not merely storage or concealment. It was symbolic, an extension of the afterlife that guided the soul's journey after death. The winding corridors could be seen as the soul's passage through trials toward the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Each chamber may have held its own meaning, whether as a courtroom for the soul or as a dwelling place of guardian spirits. In this way, the labyrinth was not only a building, but a book of stone, an architectural text readable only to those who grasped its symbols. And perhaps this is why the labyrinth remains so powerful in our imagination, for it touches something deeper than physical structures, something bound to fear, hope, and humanity's longing for the unseen. Today, when one stands upon the land once believed to conceal the labyrinth, there is only quiet plain, ruins barely recognizable, and desert winds sweeping sand as if to cover the last traces. Yet within that silence, one can feel echoes of the past, as though the sound of thousands of footsteps still marched through unseen corridors. No one can say for certain whether the labyrinth remains below or whether it has truly vanished into time. But it is the mystery itself that makes it eternal. As long as there are those who ask, as long as there are those who imagine, the Egyptian labyrinth will live on. a shadow lurking beneath the desert, waiting to be told again. Imagine a morning in Egypt thousands of years ago, when the sun had just risen beyond the horizon and its golden light slowly swept across the low plains filled with sand and stone. The air was still cool, and the grains of sand, damp with night dew, glittered like shards of glass. Workers rose from their short sleep in simple huts made of dried mud and straw. They were ordinary people, yet in their daily lives they became part of a project whose mystery still echoes today. With thin bodies and sunburned skin, they began their day lifting burdens, smoothing stones, or preparing simple food from coarsely ground grains. Their lives were dictated by a harsh rhythm, as though there was no choice but to work in silence and obedience. No one truly knew for whom they labored, whether for the pharaoh they revered, or for the priests who guarded the darker secrets behind the structure they were raising. Amidst the bustle of work, there were whispers never spoken aloud. Some believed the structure they were building was not merely a dwelling for kings or a temple for gods, but a gateway to another world. The long corridors they dug with rough hands often made them feel lost even before the building was finished. Sometimes they heard strange echoes, like footsteps coming from behind walls still sealed shut. At night, when they rested, they spoke of these things in low tones, fearful that someone might overhear and accuse them of disobedience. For some, this project was an honor, proof they were chosen to play a role in something to be remembered forever. But for others, it was a curse, an endless toil that drained their strength and left them hollow. Building a labyrinth or tomb was not merely stacking stone upon stone. There were symbols that had to be carved, small statues placed in precise corners, and chambers arranged according to teachings known only to the priests. A worker might spend his entire life etching fine lines into a single pillar, never knowing why those lines must exist or what they meant. When he asked, the only answer was that it was the will of the gods, or part of rules that could not be broken. In that silence, their labor became ritual, a repetition that felt sacred yet exhausting. No one could say if they truly understood their role, or if they were merely unseen hands for a greater power. As the day went on, the sun climbed higher, the heat pressed harder, and the sand that had been damp turned into dust that stung nose and eyes. Yet the work did not stop. They continued moving stones, digging earth, and smoothing hard surfaces. Sometimes they unearthed strange objects, like brittle fragments of bone or shards of pottery with unfamiliar engravings. No one knew where these objects came from. Some believed they were remnants of their ancestors. Others said they were signs they had dug too deep, disturbing something that should never be touched. But there was no time for further questions, for the overseers would quickly command them back to work, ensuring none strayed from the main purpose. Amid all this, there were quiet moments when someone paused, gazed toward the vast desert, and wondered silently if this would ever be finished. From afar, the sand dunes rolled like a frozen sea, and the blue sky stretched endlessly, as if swallowing all human effort into something small and fleeting. Yet they worked on, for in silence they also knew what they built was not for today, but for a distant future, for a world they might never see. And perhaps that is what made the labyrinth or tomb so mysterious, for it was built by hands that did not fully understand. It labored with persistence, as though guided by something beyond explanation. Day after day passed, and the workers who lived around the massive project became increasingly bound to a routine that felt endless. They awoke when dawn began to glow red, ate thin porridge made of coarse wheat, then marched to the site. Their tasks were neatly divided, some pulling stone blocks with ropes and wooden beams, others carving symbols onto the walls, while others mixed mud to use as binding material. There was little time for talk, for the overseers constantly watched with cold eyes, ensuring no one lagged or rested longer than allowed. Yet in silence, they kept questions they dared not speak aloud. Why were so many chambers being built deep underground, hidden from sunlight, accessible only through winding corridors? Why did the symbols they carved often depict creatures, half human and half beast, with large eyes that seemed to watch them from within the stone? Older workers sometimes warned the younger ones not to ask such things. They said the work belonged to the gods and priests, and ordinary men should bow their heads and obey. Yet not all could suppress their curiosity. Rumors spread that every time a new chamber was completed, priests would arrive at night, carrying burning incense and bowls filled with thick black liquid. They prayed in a tongue the workers could not understand, then sealed the chamber tightly. The next morning, anyone who tried to peer inside or ask about it would be summoned by the overseers, and often that person was never seen again, as if some invisible hand removed those who came too close to the secret. That fear deepened when one day a young worker was found lifeless at the bottom of a corridor under construction. No one knew how he could have fallen, for the passage was still shallow and not steep. His body was bruised, his eyes wide open as though witnessing something terrifying. The overseer said he had been crushed by stone and ordered the others back to work. But whispers soon spread that the boy had seen something before he died. That night, his friends told each other he had claimed to hear singing from within the wall, a deep, resonant voice, not human. When he tried to approach, it was as if something had pulled him into the darkness. The story spread quickly, and though no one dared repeat it in front of the overseers, nearly everyone believed he had not died by accident, but had been touched by something unseen. From that moment, the atmosphere of work changed. Workers began to look at one another with anxious suspicion, as if every stone they lifted might hide a dangerous secret. Some started carrying small charms from home, made of animal bone or small stones tied with string. They believed these objects could protect them from spirits lurking in the dark corridors. The priests, of course, forbade any amulets except those given by the temple. But the ban did not stop those desperate for safety. For the workers, living each day under the shadow of death made them cling to any protection that offered even a shred of comfort. And yet, strangely, alongside fear, there grew a sense of awe. As they dug deeper, the corridors felt like entering the belly of the earth, where the air grew colder, echoes stranger, and the torchlight flickered on stone walls, creating shadows that moved like living beings. Some claimed to see faint figures standing at the end of the corridors, but when pursued, those figures vanished without trace. There was no proof, only stories repeated again and again, yet the stories were enough to fill the air with tension. as if the great project was not only construction, but also a journey into a place where the boundary between the human world and another realm grew thin. The deeper the corridor was dug, the more strange symbols had to be carved into the stone surface. None of the workers truly understood their meaning, but they knew every stroke had to follow a specific pattern closely watched by the royal scribe. The scribe carried scrolls of papyrus filled with precise instructions, always standing near the wall, watching each movement. If a line strayed even slightly, he stopped the work at once and ordered it to be redone, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. The symbols depicted figures with animal heads, enlarged eyes, hands reaching outward as if to emerge from the surface, and endless circles that spiraled without end. Sometimes the carvings looked like maps, sometimes like incantations, but for the workers, they were merely commands to be obeyed. They often wondered why such images needed to be carved so deep underground in places never to be touched by sunlight. What use were giant symbols if only darkness would ever see them? Yet the scribe never answered, and the priests, who sometimes appeared, merely nodded as if no reason was ever to be known by ordinary men. On certain nights, after the workers had been dismissed, torches still glowed faintly at the far end of the corridor. Whispers drifted in the dark, a mixture of prayers and chants, as though a ritual was being performed without witness. By the next morning, walls that had been bare were filled with new symbols, as if carved by invisible hands. The workers could only look upon them uneasily, realizing their labor was but a fragment of something far greater. Stories of the symbols spread. Some believed they were maps to the underworld. Others thought them spells to summon spirits to guard the tomb, and still others whispered they were warnings, markers that mankind should not cross certain thresholds. But such words remained whispers, for no one dared speak too loudly. When a young worker once tried to trace a carving on the ground with a stick, the overseer rushed forward in fury, crushed the image, and struck him until he fell. None ever saw the boy again in the line of laborers the next day. It was as if the carvings themselves carried a power not meant for common hands. Amid that fear, strange moments sometimes arose. The flickering torchlight cast trembling rays, and on certain walls the carved shadows seemed to move as if spinning on their own. Circles carved in stone appeared to whirl faster, while figures with animal heads seemed to bow or turn their gaze, though they were fixed in rock. They blamed weary eyes and the dim corridor, but in their hearts many believed the carvings were more than mere pictures. Some began to avoid certain walls, walking with bowed heads and closed eyes, believing that staring too long into the symbols might trap their minds within them. Even the nights in camp changed. Outside the corridors, in makeshift tents, workers tried to sleep with weary bodies, yet their dreams were filled with shadows. Many claimed to dream of wandering endless passages, accompanied by whispers repeating foreign words. Others dreamed of symbols glowing red, only to awaken drenched in cold sweat. Some screamed in their sleep, shaken awake by companions. No one knew if it was merely the toll of labor, or if the carvings themselves held power to pierce human dreams. With time, it became clear that the construction of the tomb was not simply to bury the body of a king or noble. Something was being guarded, something never to touch the light. And for this, they built labyrinthine corridors layered with secret carvings. The workers were silent witnesses, and though they did not understand the meaning, they knew they were shaping something far beyond ordinary life. Behind every carving, behind every stone chiseled, lingered a fear that never truly left them. The priests who came into the corridors never spoke to the workers. They appeared suddenly, usually late at night, carrying dim torches as they slowly traced the walls filled with carvings. They wore long robes of black or deep brown, hoods drawn low so that only faint torchlight revealed a chin or the outline of lips. There was no sound except the soft steps of their feet and the rustle of cloth sweeping through dust. Any worker still inside the corridor immediately moved aside, lowering their heads, pretending to busy themselves with chisels, though in truth they merely waited for the priests to pass without stopping, for custom made everyone uneasy. The priests always halted at specific points marked by large circles carved in stone. There they lit incense, its smoke curling upward, filling the corridor with a sharp, bitter scent. Then they began to whisper in a foreign tongue no one understood. Their words repeated, sometimes soft, sometimes rising, as if they spoke to something within the wall, not to another human. Afterward, they placed their hands upon the cold stone as though absorbing something from the surface covered in carvings. No one knew whether it was prayer, spell, or ritual duty, yet the atmosphere in the corridor always changed during it. The air grew heavy, torches flickered violently, and many workers swore their skin prickled, though the air had not stirred. At times, once the whispering ended, the priests drew small objects from leather pouches. Some were fragments of bone, some shards of stone that glimmered strangely, and others pieces of blackened cloth, long decayed. These they placed into narrow crevices among the carvings, sealing them again with sand and clay. Workers who noticed only exchanged glances, pretending to see nothing, for they knew questions could never be asked. Whatever was embedded within the walls, they believed, was no ordinary offering. Perhaps a tribute, perhaps a warning, or even a binding meant to keep something trapped behind the stone. When the priests departed, the corridors felt more silent than before. Their torches extinguished, one by one, leaving a darkness thicker than usual. Workers often waited a long while before daring to move again, realizing in that stillness that parts of the passage were no longer the same. Some walls that had been cold now seemed faintly warm, as if they retained heat from something unseen. Some carvings gleamed faintly, light clinging to their lines, though every torch had gone dark. All of it deepened the unspoken fear, for they knew even a whisper too loud might draw unwanted attention. Stories of the rituals spread throughout the camp. Even those who had not seen them firsthand heard from others who had. Over time, the rituals became a fixture of daily life, anticipated with dread. Some began counting the nights, noticing patterns, realizing the priests appeared when the moon waned to a thin sliver. Others claimed they had seen a faint blue glow emerging from the corridor on those nights, though no flame was lit. The tales blended together, no one knowing what was true, yet all enough to rob the workers of restful sleep. Beneath it all lingered the sense that the priests were not merely guarding a tomb, but guarding a secret not even the king who ordered the construction could fully know. They seemed less like servants of men and more like servants of something older and greater. The workers felt themselves as nothing but tools, chiseling stone for a purpose only those hooded figures understood. And with every whisper they heard, with every strange object hidden within the wall, they became more certain the corridors were not resting places, but doors meant to hold something locked forever in darkness. The days passed, and fear sank deeper into the minds of the workers. Those who once only felt anxious now lost all sense of normal life. Sleep was no longer a place of rest, but a chamber where visions of corridors and the whispers of priests returned again and again. Many dreamed of being trapped inside the stone walls, hearing the same repeating chants of the priests, or seeing faint eyes opening from within the carvings. The dreams were so vivid, their bodies broke into cold sweat whenever they awoke, and more than a few chose to stay awake through the night despite their exhaustion. By day, they worked with reddened eyes, sluggish movements, and hands trembling when they tried to hold their chisels. That exhaustion bred strange illnesses that no simple remedy could explain. Some suddenly lost their voices, some felt sharp pains in their chest, and others found their skin covered in red blotches without cause. The camp healer offered herbal mixtures, but relief never lasted long. The sickness seemed less of the body and more of something subtle, something clinging to the mind and heart. Each time the priests performed their rituals, the symptoms grew worse, as though the smoke of incense and the foreign whispers left traces that seeped into their skin. No one dared to speak of it aloud, for they felt naming the suffering would make it more real. Daily life in the camp grew tense. The casual chatter once heard around campfires faded almost entirely. People preferred silence, sitting in thought, or staring at the ground while rolling stones between their fingers. Some workers crafted small charms from bone, twine, or bits of wood, hoping such simple tokens could shield them from unseen influences. Yet even the charms offered no peace, for the nightmares and the heavy weight in their chests returned regardless. A few dared to escape the camp, heading toward nearby villages. But strangely, many returned the next day, dazed and unable to explain how they became lost in the desert. They only shook their heads, saying their steps always led back toward the labyrinth, as though the path out had been erased from memory. The fear also poisoned their trust in one another. Workers who once helped each other now exchanged suspicious glances. Some believed that certain men among them had already fallen under the priest's influence, serving as spies who reported their whispers of doubt. Small signs like a vacant stare or a misplaced smile unsettled everyone. The camp turned into a place thick with secrecy, where no one truly trusted another. Some even slept apart, hiding behind stone piles, afraid their own companions might become threats. And yet, the work continued. Corridors were dug, walls were carved, and new symbols emerged. With every hammer striking stone came the sense of awakening, something that should have been left untouched. The workers grew more aware that they were not merely building a tomb, but opening a path into deeper, darker chambers. This psychological weight became part of their daily rhythm, woven into the dust sweat, and clang of metal. There was no return, and the more they resisted the thought, the more certain they became that the stone walls were silently watching them. The deeper corridors began to reveal signs that this was no ordinary burial site. The air within grew thicker, as though something pressed down upon the chest of anyone who entered. The temperature was colder than the desert surface, yet not a refreshing cold, but one heavy with dampness and shadows that clung to the skin. The flames of the torches often flickered for no reason, sometimes shrinking as though consumed by an unseen force. The hammer strikes against stone echoed strangely, no longer sharp and ringing, but muffled, as if absorbed by the walls themselves. Some workers swore they heard their voices echo back, but not with the same words. It was as if something inside the stone imitated their speech, twisting it slightly, making it sound unfamiliar. The first chamber they opened was smaller than expected, yet its shape was unnatural. The walls were uneven, rippling as though melted into form, though clearly carved by human hands. In the center of the floor was a shallow basin that remained damp, though no water dripped from above. A worker who touched it described the surface as slick like oil, yet without scent. Whenever a torch was brought near, the flame reflected oddly, casting shadows that moved in ways that did not match their bodies. Many refused to linger there, yet the priests grew more eager, convinced that this was proof of spirits beginning to gather, guardians watching their path into the deeper chambers. The strangeness only deepened in the next room. The carvings on the walls grew denser, covering nearly every inch of stone. These were not the common religious symbols found in Egyptian tombs, but spirals, doubled lines, and eyes repeated dozens of times. One worker attempted to count the eyes, but the total always changed each time, as if the symbols shifted when unobserved. Some carvings were so deep they created black hollows, and workers often felt they were being watched from within. The unease grew, yet the priest's commands remained firm. The work must continue. From this second chamber came a faint, inexplicable sound. At first, they believed it to be wind slipping through cracks in the stone. But soon the sound revealed rhythm, not music, but a drawn whisper repeating endlessly. Some said it was like a prayer, while others insisted it was a lament. What unsettled them most was that the sound remained even when all movement ceased. No footsteps, no hammer strikes, no torches shifting, yet still the sound lingered, floating in the air like mist. Each time the workers returned to the surface from that chamber, their bodies felt heavier, as if the corridors clung to their very bones. Even after washing or resting, the weight remained. Some lost their appetite, food turned tasteless, and water bitter. The deeper they went, the stronger their conviction grew that this place was not built merely to house the dead, but to guard something far older and far darker. What began as labor had become a descent into the edges of madness. They could no longer tell whether the voices came from the corridors or from their own unraveling minds. But one truth was clear: the deeper they went, the less possible it became to ever feel at peace again. For the workers, the whispering from the corridors was a creeping threat gnawing at their minds, depriving them of sleep, filling their dreams with unexplainable shadows. Yet for the priests, the sound was a blessing. They lingered long in the second chamber, eyes closed, listening with expressions of conviction. They whispered among themselves that the echo was the language of the ancestors, a prayer that had never ceased since the tomb was sealed. The clearer the sound became, the more certain they were that guardian spirits had drawn near, judging whether these intruders were worthy to continue. What terrified the workers gave the priests renewed fervor. The wall carvings dense with spirals and eyes were interpreted not as frightening marks, but as sacred signs of vigilance. "These eyes are no threat," one priest declared. "They are windows of the Spirit. They see us, weigh our hearts. If we are honest, the eyes will open the path." Such words only deepened the workers' unease. What use was an open path when every step was watched by unblinking gazes, even when their own eyes were closed? For the priests, the symbols marked the perfection of the circle of life and death. For the workers, the emblems were shadows, stalking even their dreams. As they pushed deeper into the corridors, the priests began performing small rituals in every chamber. They lit incense, scattered bitter black powder, and chanted prayers in a language the workers could not understand. The heavy smoke mingled with the damp stench of the rooms, making heads spin and stomachs churn. Yet the priests called it purification. They believed every chamber had to be filled with smoke so that the spirits dwelling within would remain calm. Workers who coughed or gagged were accused of weak faith and forced to endure until the incense was gone. This clash of views only heightened the tension. The workers began to feel like tools rather than men. Their fear was dismissed as lack of devotion, though the dread gnawed at them relentlessly. Many whispered of quitting, of returning to the surface. But each time, the priests warned that retreat was a sin. We have passed the gate of eyes. If we go back, those eyes will close forever. Whoever leaves will lose the Spirit's protection. It was not just a warning, it was a trap. The workers felt cornered, as if even the exit was part of the curse. Fear manifested in their bodies. Some complained of itching skin with no cause. Others saw red welts appear on their arms within the chamber of symbols, though no sharp stone touched them. Still others felt a hand press upon their shoulder, only to turn and find no one there. The priests dismissed it all as trials of the Spirit. Only those who endured would gain blessing, they said. For the workers, these were not trials, but torment, each day heavier than the last. At last, the whispers grew clearer. Sometimes they resembled prayers, sometimes drawn-out wails. But what made the blood run cold was when the voices began calling names. Not loudly, not sharply, but softly spoken directly into the ear, as if someone stood close beside them. The workers turned pale, for these names were theirs, known only to themselves, impossible for others to guess. The priests answered with a thin smile. "It is a sign," they said. "You are chosen to be part of this journey." Yet to those who heard, it was no holy sign, but an unavoidable threat. The tomb itself now recognized them, one by one. Over time, the whispers no longer sounded like meaningless echoes. What once seemed like drawn-out laments or blurred prayers began to form distinct words. though muffled as if spoken from beneath water. The workers heard fragments of sentences urging them deeper, sometimes simple orders like turning left or touching a certain wall. At first, they thought it was illusion, but the more they resisted, the more the voices pressed into their ears. The priests, hearing the same, received it with reverence. They knelt, placed their hands upon the stone floor, and murmured thanks. To them, the ancestors had finally spoken directly. But to the workers, the commanding whispers felt like invisible cords binding their minds. Some workers began losing control of their bodies. One would walk forward without reason, striding into darkness before a torch was lit. Their eyes appeared vacant, yet their faces serene, as if sleepwalking. Companions dragged them back, but once awake, they remembered nothing, only the sense of a call that demanded obedience. The priests saw no danger in this, only selection. Whoever was called, they said, bore a pure soul fit for the message. Yet those dragged unwillingly felt nothing but terror. How could the call be sacred if it stole their will? The rhythm of the journey changed. No longer did the priests lead. Now the voices in the corridor did. Whenever a whisper commanded a turn, the priests obeyed without hesitation, assuring all that this was the correct path, even as it led deeper into an unknown labyrinth. The workers felt stripped of agency, mere passengers within a voyage charted by disembodied tongues. Sometimes two voices conflicted, one urging them to stop, another to move forward. The priests closed their eyes, chose one, and declared it the higher will. But who could ever know which was right? None. All was guesswork, cloaked in faith. In such conditions, nightmares plagued the workers. Even those resting near the surface or at the cave mouth reported the whispers persisted, invading sleep. When they shut their eyes, the voices entered dreams, repeating the same cryptic commands. Some dreamed of walking endlessly through corridors without end, turning endlessly yet finding no exit. Others dreamed of their own faces carved into the walls, as if the labyrinth swallowed their identities one by one. The priests interpreted the dreams as revelations. The workers saw them as loss. This rift in interpretation widened. The priests grew more convinced of their righteous course, speaking with certainty that their grand destination was near. The workers spoke of escape, but each time the thought of fleeing arose, the voices seemed to know. The whispers grew louder, pressing against their ears until their skulls throbbed. Their names were called repeatedly, followed by veiled threats: "Do not run, the gate will close." None dared to ignore such warnings, for belief in unseen watchers had rooted too deep. At this stage, some workers abandoned their names. They no longer introduced themselves as individuals, but by nicknames or marks given by their companions. They feared uttering their names aloud, for whenever names were spoken, the voices grew sharper, closer. The priests allowed this, even encouraged it. Casting aside one's name, they said, was readiness to merge with the flow of spirits. To the workers, it was their greatest loss. Without a name, how could one distinguish self from shadow haunting the corridors? The journey darkened further. Even burning torches gave no comfort, their light consumed by a heavier gloom. Footsteps echoed strangely, as if more walked than were present. Workers heard the tread of unseen followers, yet the priests raised their hands and claimed these were guardians. Each time they stopped, the echoes ceased. Each time they moved, the echoes returned. Some workers walked with ears covered, hoping for silence, but the voices pressed closer, no longer around them, but within their minds. The group continued their march, each echo of their steps within the corridor serving as guideposts. They carried no map, no markings upon the walls to remember, only the occasional whispers instructing them to turn, halt, or move on. The workers realized the route they followed no longer matched the plan once given by the priests. They were supposed to carve eastward toward the main chamber, yet the whispers drove them southward, deeper. Strangely, each time they obeyed, new paths emerged, as if the labyrinth reshaped itself to allow passage. Stones once sealed and immovable cracked apart, revealing gaps wide enough for them to enter. Deeper within, the air changed. What had been dry and dusty grew damp, as though unseen waters flowed behind the walls. Droplets fell from the ceiling, joining the echoes of their march. Torchlight reflected off surfaces that now gleamed not rough limestone, but mineral layers glistening like wet glass. Workers whispered their doubts. Was this passage ancient or newly formed by unseen power? The priests dismissed such thoughts, declaring it proof that the spirits could open ways for the chosen. After hours of descent, they entered a vast chamber absent from any record. Its ceiling rose high, higher than any burial chamber known in Egypt. Its walls bore carvings unlike familiar hieroglyph spirals, circles, and repeating swirls like whirlpools. The symbols shimmered faintly, as if light welled within the stone itself. The priests proclaimed this as the secret chamber, accessible only by divine guidance. The workers, however, felt unease. The silence was unnatural. Their own voices dulled, as though absorbed by the walls. Torches set upon the floor bent strangely, their flames pulled toward the carvings. No wind stirred, yet fire leaned. Those who touched the walls recoiled at a biting chill. One worker claimed to hear full sentences, no longer muffled whispers, but words resounding inside his head. He collapsed, trembling, eyes vacant, then smiling for no reason. To the priests, this was confirmation. They commanded all to sit, close their eyes, and listen. Yet some resisted, terror locking their limbs. They clung near the entrance, longing to return. But the passage behind them no longer appeared the same. It narrowed, stone closing upon itself as though swallowing the way back. There seemed no exit but further inward. Tension peaked as the voice grew audible to all, not just priests or sensitives, but every soul present. It was deep, heavy, stripped of humanity. It came from everywhere: walls, air, even from within their chests. Its command was simple: remain and listen. None dared disobey, though fear coiled within. In that stillness, only shallow breaths and heartbeats thundered like drums. Then they knew. This chamber was not empty. It was the heart of the labyrinth, a place awaiting them. Symbols on the walls seemed to shift with flickering flame. Their eyes fixed, and the boundary between waking and dream blurred. None could say if they stood conscious or already crossed into dream. They only knew one truth, that this labyrinth harbored not merely death, but something older, darker, and far more patient than anything they had known. The voice no longer offered commands alone. Slowly, it unveiled something not in words, but in visions that filled the chamber. Torchlight dimmed, replaced by a pale glow seeping from the symbols upon the walls. Suddenly, the room transformed into a stage for a story older than any of them. Workers and priests no longer saw stone walls, but barren earth, a vast desert beneath a burning red sky. Out of the swirling dust emerged towering figures, faces concealed behind golden masks. They did not walk. They drifted, weightless, as if the ground did not bind them. The priests declared these were ancient ancestors, sovereigns of forgotten ages, revealing their secrets. But to the workers, the sight was terrifying. The figures did not speak with mouths. Their golden eyes pierced minds with torrents of thought. They showed collapsing pyramids, cities swallowed by sand, and the Nile drying two cracked scales like a serpent's skin. One by one, workers bowed their heads, trembling. They felt as though they were witnessing the death of their own land. Then the vision shifted. The desert dissolved, replaced by a strange landscape, black stones rising like towers, encircled by a shoreless sea of darkness. Above, the sky churned with spiraling stars. From afar came metallic howls, beasts not of earth. The workers could not comprehend, yet the priests claimed it to be prophecy. They declared the world would one day be consumed by darkness from the heavens, and only those who heeded the Spirit's call would endure. The voice grew sharper. This time, words struck into their hearts. You are witnesses, not rulers. You open the way, but it is not for you. The chamber trembled, and the last torches extinguished. Their only light now came from the cold glow of shifting symbols on the walls. Some workers wept, others curled tight. Some pressed their ears shut, though it was useless. The voice resounded not from without, but from blood and bone. An elder priest rose, body quaking, hands lifted toward the circling light above. His eyes glazed as strange words poured from his mouth. The tongue was alien, not hieroglyphic, not of common speech. Yet the voice fell silent, allowing him to speak as if he had become its vessel. When his utterance ceased, his body collapsed, lips still mumbling, though breath faltered. In the stillness that followed, the workers realized what they saw could not be dismissed as illusion. They had all seen the same, heard the same, felt the same terror. There was no exit, no escape. Only the question remained: were they witnessing an unavoidable future, or merely the labyrinth's cruel deception designed to ensnare their souls forever? The suffocating fear upon the workers' chests finally erupted into a strange courage, courage born not of faith, but of despair. They could no longer endure the voice whispering inside their bones. They wished to silence it, even if it meant defying the unseen. One young worker, gaunt with sleepless eyes, rose shakily. Grasping a heavy stone near his feet, he let out a hoarse cry and hurled it against the glowing wall. The symbols shimmered, flickering as though enraged. The voice faltered for an instant, like breath held in an invisible lung. All eyes turned upon him, some with hope, others with dread. But with the second strike, something unexplainable happened. The wall did not crack nor shatter. Instead, the stone itself broke apart in his hands. From a fracture in the air, not the stone, burst a streak of black lightning that struck him. He collapsed, body rigid, eyes wide. From his mouth spilled not his own voice, but a deep echo that chilled the chamber. He spoke in a tongue that belonged to no man, older than time. Then his body convulsed, blood seeping from nose and ears, before he fell still lifeless, as if carved into a statue, abandoned by its soul. 2 other workers rushed to aid him, but as they approached, the glowing wall unleashed a sharp brilliance, thousands of needles piercing their skin. They screamed and fled to a corner, their faces marred with red welts, as though burned from within. The priests fell to their knees, begging forgiveness from the unseen. Their chants stumbled from trembling lips, hoping to soothe the force that was no mere shadow of ancestors. Yet the voice returned, colder and firmer. Whoever destroys the sign shall become the sign. The words silenced all. Workers lowered their heads, hiding their faces, while priests mumbled broken prayers. Yet fear bore new defiance in another, a gray-haired worker who rose with heavy breath. He shouted that they could not let themselves be controlled. The walls, he said, were only stone, and stone could be broken. He pressed his hands upon a glowing symbol, trying to pry it away. But it was not stone he felt, it was skin, alive and pulsing beneath his fingers. The symbol throbbed like flesh. Startled, he tried to pull away, but his hands stuck fast, fused to its glow. Light crawled up his arm, enveloping his body, until his face shone like a lantern. His scream filled the chamber. Then his form stiffened, and slowly he vanished, absorbed into the wall itself. When the light faded, nothing remained but the stench of burned flesh and a dark stain on the stone. Silence followed, vast and suffocating, as though the chamber itself waited for their next breath. The remaining workers wept, some blaming themselves, others cursing the priests. A few tried to flee toward the entrance, but the passage they had walked before was now sealed by stone they did not recall. The labyrinth had swallowed them whole. There was no escape, only the descent further inward. The voice whispered again, not threatening now, but cold and final. The path is chosen, and you are part of it. When the final scream of the worker absorbed into the wall faded, only ragged breaths lingered in the chamber. The priests, pale as chalk, exchanged fearful glances as though answers might be found in each other's eyes. They knew that silence would let the voice devour their minds, yet resistance would invite a fate more dreadful than death. At last, the eldest among them, a frail man in a tattered robe stained with sand and blood, rose slowly. He lifted his hands to the ceiling and began chanting an ancient prayer, one never spoken in public, passed only through the most secret circles. It was not a prayer to the gods known to the people, but a summoning, a binding, meant to call and restrain wandering spirits. His voice trembled, yet carried steadily, flowing like underground water. The other priests joined, weaving a low chorus that swirled in the air. The resonance made the glowing walls throb, as though a heart stirred by the call. The remaining workers watched in silence, some shivering, others clutching their bodies against the sudden cold creeping through the room. As the chants grew louder, a strange odor filled the chamber, mingling of burning incense and long-rotted flesh. Heat rose from the floor, lifting grains of sand like dark golden dust. Then the unexpected unfolded. From cracks in the walls poured not light, but shadow. It seeped like black liquid, dripping from the fading symbols. The shadows crawled across the floor, forming rings that encircled the priests. The eldest swayed, eyes bulging, yet continued chanting, his voice heavier, deeper. Workers screamed for them to stop, but none of the priests could. Their mouths moved of their own accord, tongues shaping words older than hieroglyphs etched beyond the labyrinth. As the ring sealed, the air within quivered as if something pressed upward from beneath. A metallic stench, like burning iron, filled their lungs, and a sound like the march of countless soldiers thundered through the chamber. The ground trembled, and from the circle rose a vague figure, tall, formless, but with eyes that glowed crimson like embers. Its face was unseen, only a towering silhouette. With each slow step, the wall symbols blazed once more, no longer gentle, but as though the chamber itself had been wounded. The priests who summoned it screamed, bodies quaking, yet their voices would not stop. The figure turned to them, one by one. Each time its gaze fell, a priest collapsed as though struck from within, blood spilling from the mouth, bodies stilled forever. Yet the ritual words did not cease. They now seemed to come not from human lips, but from the very chamber itself. The eldest endured the longest, his voice breaking into a wail fused with shadowed whispers. At last, his body too fell, and silence claimed the circle. The shadowed figure stood unmoving, then lowered its head toward the workers cowering at the edge of the chamber. No words escaped its form. Yet an answer bloomed inside their minds. I am the guardian abandoned, imprisoned not by stone, but by promise. And now that promise is broken. The words were cold, firm, as though the earth itself had spoken. The silence that followed its declaration felt heavier than any scream or wail. The workers stared at one another, their faces drained of life as though something had been stolen from them. None dared to move, as though the very air had thickened into liquid, restraining their bodies. The shadowed figure stood unmoving at the center of the circle, its crimson eyes unblinking, glowing with a light that had no source. Then a voice echoed in their minds again, clearer, steadier, bearing intent. This tomb is no prison for a king, but for a promise never meant to be remembered. These walls are not stone, but words carved into form, and your blood merely replenishes what had begun to fade. The words pierce them like cold blades, cutting into the innermost parts of their being. One young worker, trembling, dared to ask what promise it spoke of. The figure did not answer immediately. Instead, the walls quivered, and the symbols once faint blazed anew, reshaping themselves in response to the question. They formed strange images of a woman wearing a forked crown, holding a key with rows of faceless shadows behind her. The workers swallowed hard, realizing they were witnessing a hidden record. not written with ink or chisel, but with something alive and far more terrifying. The shadow spoke again within their skulls. There was once a queen who refused death. She traded her soul for a promise. The gods denied her, but mortals could be swayed. They built this place not to honor, but to bind. Yet each drop of fresh blood upon the sand loosens the seal. The words pressed upon them like a weight, stealing their breath. They recalled their fallen comrades, consumed by the walls, and understood that spilled blood had become the key, part of an ancient pact they could never comprehend. One elderly worker fell to his knees, tears streaming as he prayed to the gods he knew, calling upon Ra, Osiris, and Isis, hoping one would hear. But the shadow cut through his prayer. Those names hold no power here. They closed their eyes, they shut their ears. This place was left to be forgotten, for if they remembered, the promise would awaken. And you are the ones who opened it. The worker screamed, body trembling violently, then collapsed, lifeless, eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Despair began to eclipse fear. Some workers rushed to the entrance, but when their hands touched the wall, sand crumbled away, revealing only flat stone without an opening. They were trapped. The shadow glided toward them, each step silent, yet leaving fine cracks upon the floor. Its burning gaze swept across their faces, and each felt weighed, measured, chosen. Then the voice returned, deeper, heavier, echoing from within their bones. Those who remain will be witnesses. What is buried cannot wholly die. It requires ears to hear, eyes to see, bodies to borrow. If you survive, you will carry secrets you can never tell, for any who hear will be bound as well. The words sealed the chamber in suffocating stillness. The workers stared at one another, realizing they were no longer mere diggers of tombs, but parts of something vaster, darker than they could ever imagine. The crushing silence within the chamber slowly shifted into something more disturbing. The workers' breathing grew ragged, and some began to feel as if the floor beneath them was no longer stone but a moving sea of sand. Their vision blurred, and the shadows on the walls appeared more real than the bodies of their companions beside them. The glowing symbols now seemed to spin, forming faint circles of light that danced, as though each stroke carried them into a different story. One worker whispered that he saw his childhood village etched upon the wall, but his smiling mother's face turned into a skull with hollow eyes. Another claimed to see the Nile gleaming, but its waters were crimson, with headless bodies drifting along the current. The visions grew stronger until reality itself became uncertain. Some screamed names of loved ones long dead, calling out as though they were present. Others reached for the images on the walls, only to feel their hands sink into a chill that seemed to devour their flesh. The shadow stood silently in the center, allowing the hallucinations to unfold unchecked. As though this was part of a trial they were meant to endure. Its glowing eyes remained unchanged, but within their gleam, the workers saw themselves edged, cracked, wounded. Some transformed into statues of stone, mouths frozen wide in silent screams. Then another voice arose, but not from the figure, it came from the walls themselves. Whispers multiplied, layer upon layer, like thousands of voices speaking at once in broken harmony. You have been summoned, you who walk with fragile steps, you who carry blood as a torch. Remember, what you see is no illusion but a door, and every door you gaze upon demands its price. The voices drove some to cover their ears, yet the sound remained, lodged inside their skulls. A young worker suddenly collapsed, eyes wide, mouth opening to mimic words not his own. Broken fragments of an ancient tongue spilled from him, his tongue moving as if commanded by another. She waits in the deepest chamber, bound but not extinguished, thirsty but never sated. Do not wake her. Do not wake her. Then his body shook violently before falling still. His heart stopped, his flesh already cold, as though time itself had ended for him. Panic spread, but each attempt to resist the visions only deepened them. A man who closed his eyes found himself buried alive in sand, grains filling his mouth and nose, his final breath strangled. Another saw himself seated upon a golden throne, adored by faceless masses, only to realize his body rotted away upon the seat. There was no escape, no refuge. Every choice led them toward the same abyss, devouring their sanity. In desperation, one cried out to the shadow, begging for release, offering his life in exchange to end the torment. The shadow merely tilted its head, and the voice returned. There is no bargaining here. What you see is a mirror, and mirrors do not lie. You entered, carrying the fragments needed. What waits only takes back what was promised. The words froze their blood, as if the flow within their veins slowed to a crawl. They began to realize there was no longer a boundary between hallucination and reality. What appeared upon the walls, what they heard, what they felt upon their skin, everything fused together, creating a new reality that devoured the old. One by one, the workers collapsed, some from terror, others because their bodies could no longer endure the weight. Only a few remained standing, hollow-eyed lips cracked, clinging to the last shards of belief eroded by the shadow before them. Amid the panic and the fallen bodies, only a handful remained standing, though their knees trembled and their eyes were dim. They stared at the shadow as if hoping for an answer, yet all they found was an empty, bottomless gaze. The voice returned, clearer now. No longer a chorus of whispers, but a single presence speaking directly into their souls. Every soul that enters carries a burden. Every burden must be weighed. None may leave without surrendering something. Choose your body, your memory, or your blood. The words fell like stones into their minds, forcing them to confront the meaning of loss. A middle-aged man, his face streaked with sweat and dust, staggered forward. His hands trembled as he raised them in surrender. He whispered that his body was weak, that he did not fear if flesh and bone were taken, so long as his children at home would be spared the curse he carried. The shadow gazed at him, and his body shuddered violently. Within seconds, his skin dried, his muscles collapsed, and he fell as nothing but fragile bones. Strangely, his face bore a faint smile, as if relief had reached him at the final breath. The others stood frozen, horrified yet awed that a body could crumble to dust by a single choice. The next, a thin young man whose eyes still held a glimmer, chose differently. He knelt, bowed his head, and whispered that he would surrender all his memories, the face of his mother, the voice of his brother, the laughter of his lover, back in the village. The shadow did not move, but the symbols on the walls glowed. Suddenly, his eyes emptied. He rose, walking aimlessly, like a shell without spirit. His mouth hung open, but no words came. All his memories had vanished, erased, leaving only a vacant body wandering in silence. His companions wept, for to them this was worse than death. Another attempted to bargain, choosing to offer his blood. He cut his arm with a sharp stone, and the blood dripped upon the floor. Yet as the first drops fell, the stone drank them, and the flow did not cease. His blood poured endlessly, far beyond the wound. He collapsed, trembling, his body drained, the stream crawling toward the shadow like a crimson river. Soon he lay pale, his eyes empty, nothing more than an empty husk. Only 3 remained, standing within the dim circle. The shadow no longer spoke, simply waited. Silence pressed upon them like a blade in the air. They knew their time was short, each passing moment an invitation for death. One began to laugh hysterically, not from joy, but from a mind broken by fear. His laughter echoed, shaking the walls, then ceased abruptly as his body froze, breath stolen by no visible cause. 2 remained, staring at each other. They could not decide which fate was worse, for each path ended in ruin. One whispered that perhaps the secret of the tomb was never meant for them, that they were only small tools in a larger game. The other nodded, his eyes wet, wondering silently if forgiveness might exist within the darkness. Yet the shadow stood still, as if savoring their helplessness. At last, one of them knelt, closing his eyes in prayer. He chose neither body, nor memory, nor blood, but offered his heart. He whispered that if the entity required something, let it be his love, his fear, his hope. After that, he was silent, his body still breathing, but his eyes were lifeless. His face bore no emotion, his soul extinguished. He moved to the corner, sat down like a statue, and never stirred again. Only one remained. His breath was heavy, his body trembling, yet his eyes held a flicker of courage as he stared into the shadow's red gaze. He did not know what choice to make, but he knew he could not run. The final decision awaited him, and in the burning eyes before him, he sensed that whatever he chose would open the door to the tomb's deepest secret. He stood alone in the chamber, which felt smaller, though the walls had not moved. His breath was heavy, as if the weight pressed not only on his chest, but also crushed his soul. Each step he took echoed long across the stone floor, each sound a reminder that there was no way back. He tried to stare at the shadow, searching for weakness or perhaps a flicker of mercy. Yet all he saw were unblinking red eyes burning like eternal torches in the darkness. The shadow offered no words now, only silence. Silence that forced the last man to choose for himself. The choices of body, memory, blood, and heart had already been taken, each ending in ruin. He knew that whatever he chose would destroy him. Yet beneath the fear was a faint glimmer, a whisper telling him that perhaps, just perhaps, there was a fourth path unspoken. A choice not of body, not of memory, not of blood, not of heart, but of surrendering wholly himself, without condition. He raised his hands, not trembling, but calm. Closing his eyes, he spoke softly, declaring that he gave his entire being, his soul tied to his flesh, to the power dwelling in the chamber. No plea, no bargain-only surrender. The chamber shook, not with cracks of collapse, but with a pulse like a heartbeat through the walls. The symbols around him glowed brighter, forming a circle of light that surrounded him. His body did not collapse into bones, nor wander empty of memory, nor bleed into nothingness, nor turn hollow without emotion. Instead, it remained upright as he slowly faded, like mist dissolving in morning air. For the first time, the shadow moved, stepping closer until it merged with him. There was no scream, no struggle, only silence, thick and absolute. The fallen workers, though lifeless, seemed to rest in quiet reverence for what had just occurred. When the last man vanished, silence filled the chamber. The glowing symbols dimmed one by one, leaving only gentle darkness. The shadow that once dominated the room was gone, as though it had found a vessel within the human who surrendered completely. And in that silence, it felt as though an unspoken promise lingered that the tomb's deepest secret was never meant to be discovered, but to live on in those who dared to give themselves wholly. The stone walls shuddered softly, opening a narrow gap, just enough for sunlight to pierce through. The beam illuminated the dusty floor and scattered bones. But no one remained to witness it, for every soul inside had chosen its fate. The gap closed once more, and the tomb sank back into its darkness, waiting for another age or perhaps never to open again. After the final sacrifice, the tomb seemed like a new space, though the walls remained the same and the stones still stood cold. There was a deeper silence now, different from the earlier silence filled with threat. This silence felt like a heavy blanket wrapping everything gently, making the dry air almost peaceful. The light that once slipped through the narrow gap had vanished, yet its trace lingered faintly on the floor, like the last line of the evening sun. No footsteps, no voices, no breath of life remained. Only dust moved slowly, swirling lightly with the faintest breath of air. The tomb itself seemed to breathe. From the walls came subtle vibrations that pulsed and faded, like the heartbeat of an ancient being asleep. Each pulse carried shadows sliding faintly across the stone, as though something still lived within, though no body could be seen. This silence was not an end, but a continuation, a sign that something had shifted, not disappeared. The last soul that surrendered had now merged with the tomb's secret, and the shadow that once ruled was no longer a separate entity, but part of him. No one could tell if that was freedom or a new prison. If someday an outsider were to enter, perhaps they would see only an empty chamber with scattered bones. They might believe it nothing more than an abandoned tomb, unaware that within the silence, eyes still watched unseen. Whispers still swirled, though unheard. An energy still lived, waiting to see whether human courage would touch it again, or whether it would rest forever. Every mote of dust seemed to carry a record. Every crack in the wall stored a memory. every fading symbol held a spark that refused to die. The tomb did not collapse, nor did it open. It chose to remain intact, like the belly of the earth holding secrets with patience. And within that quiet was a melancholy hard to describe, like a house waiting for its occupants, though knowing they would never return. The shadow that had merged with the final soul might have found peace or might be waiting for a new game. And perhaps hundreds or thousands of years from now, when desert sands shift once more, the doorway will be revealed again, calling new souls inside, and the circle of mystery will begin again. The tomb slowly turned into a kind of great clock without hands, yet it kept the beat of time in its own way. Every grain of sand that fell through the cracks in the ceiling was a passing second. Every new fracture along the walls was a minute moving forward, and every layer of dust thickening on the floor was an hour accumulating. No bells rang, no signs announced the changing of days. Yet within that silence, time never stopped. It simply moved differently. For those once trapped inside, time might have been a prison, but now time had become memory, and memory clung to the stone, the air, and the shadows. Within that chamber, the air never truly died. There were faint currents that sometimes carried the scent of damp earth, though no water was in sight. That fragrance seemed to come from the past, like a breath left behind by those who once lived, mingling with the swirling dust before fading away again. At times, a faint sound could be heard, perhaps. Just the crack of stone, but if one's ears were patient enough, it resembled a whisper, as though the walls wished to tell a story, but could not finish the sentence. There was a tale left there, but only in fragments, never whole, and that made it all the more captivating. Imagine someone entering without knowledge of its history. They might see only an empty chamber with frozen traces of the past. They might touch the walls and feel their chill, never knowing that behind that coldness once burned hot emotions. They might see the faded symbols and think of them as mere ornaments, without realizing they were once part of a ritual that decided life and death. This tomb does not speak in ways easily understood. It speaks in time, and only those who can dive into time can hear its voice. The tomb was not merely a repository of bodies, but of layered feelings. There was fear frozen in the air, loss clinging to the dust, and waiting etched into every stone crack. All these blended into an atmosphere that could only be felt, never seen. And the longer it stayed buried, the thicker those layers of feeling became, making it like a vessel always full, yet never spilling over. Waited not to be opened, but to be understood. Like a book without letters, yet full of meaning for those brave enough to face its pages without haste. In the end, this tomb bore witness that time is not only something that moves forward, but also something that stays. It lingers in stone, in dust, in shadow, and even in silence. And perhaps the soul dared to sit in the center of that chamber without doing anything, only breathing and listening. They would sense time as something alive, not merely passing. They would hear the heartbeat of the tomb, see its breath in the dust, and feel themselves becoming part of that record. And when they left, they might never again look at time in the same way. The tomb was not merely a silent chamber freezing time, but an entity slowly absorbing life from its surroundings. It stood in stillness, yet that stillness was not empty. There was a sense that its walls were watching, observing every breath of air passing through the hidden doorway, recording every shadow daring to step on the dusty floor, and remembering every footstep that crossed it thousands of years ago. The shadows of those who once entered, whether as guardians, pilgrims, or thieves, remained etched into the tomb's air. They left invisible traces, like thin layers of themselves, clinging and never leaving. Thus, whenever someone entered, the tomb was never truly empty, for it was accompanied by echoes of all who had ever been there. It may seem strange to imagine a stone chamber possessing memory, yet is not stone itself a record? Geological layers mark millions of years, and human carvings upon its surface mark intention and belief. In this sense, the tomb became more than an architectural structure. It was a being that preserved memory without voice, without writing, only through its existence. It gazed not with eyes, but with fractures spreading in all directions. It listened not with ears, but with silence absorbing sound. It spoke not with words, but with the coldness that clung to the skin of anyone standing within it. If observed long enough, the chamber seemed to breathe, the shifts in temperature following the movement of the sun outside. The faint air currents drifting in and out tall resembled the rhythm of a living being. When air slipped in through a narrow crack, the room seemed to inhale. When the air departed, carrying grains of dust, it seemed to exhale again. This was not merely a natural phenomenon, but as if awareness lay hidden within the stone, regulating its breath with immeasurable patience. Each inhalation and exhalation occurred not in seconds, but in centuries. As time passed, the tomb became a silent observer of the changing world outside. When kingdoms fell, when civilizations shifted, when dry land became fertile only to turn barren again, the tomb remained, unmoving yet witnessing all. It did not participate, but it knew. It did not comment, but it preserved. This was what made it feel alive, for it held awareness in another form. That awareness did not belong to one person, but to the sum of all who had ever entered, all who had whispered, all who had left something within, whether a prayer or a fear. And like a living being, the tomb also had sides it refused to reveal. There were corridors that rejected light, chambers hiding themselves from human sight, as if it did not wish all its secrets to be known. Some parts were left open as bait, while others were protected by darkness, as though saying not all things were meant to be seen. The tomb did not merely keep secrets. It chose which secrets could be touched and which would remain forever buried. That is why the longer one stayed within, the greater the sense that the chamber was watching back, observing, weighing whether the visitor was worthy of knowing more, destined only to become another layer of memory lingering inside. The tomb could be understood not merely as a vessel of death, but as a gateway of trial for the soul daring to enter it. Every step through its long, winding corridors was not only a physical journey, but also an inward one, forcing a person to confront themselves. The darkness that shrouded vision demanded the visitor look inward, exposing fears that usually lay hidden. The echo of footsteps against the stone walls did not merely announce presence, but became a reflection of the soul under trial. Each echo was like a question of, "Are you? What do you seek? And are you worthy of the secrets kept here?" The deeper one ventured. The heavier the air became, not only from the narrowing its passage, but also from an unseen pressure that seemed to weigh upon the soul. No one could enter the tomb with uncertain intent, for the chamber seemed to read sincerity or deceit. If one came with greed alone, the silence turned oppressive. The walls closed in, and breath felt strangled. Yet, if one entered with reverence, aware of something greater, then though the chamber remained dark, there was a kind of gentle acceptance, as if the tomb itself opened a path. Many ancient tales circulated around the tomb stories of those who entered and never returned. Some believed they became lost in labyrinthine corridors, others that they were swallowed by spirits dwelling within. Yet another belief held that those who never returned had in fact merged with the tomb itself. Their souls became new layers, fused with the stone, serving as additional guardians of its secrets. In this way, the tomb grew, not through physical expansion, but through the accumulation of souls trapped inside. When one stood still in the heart of its hidden chambers, moments came when consciousness trembled. Faint shadows seemed to move upon the walls, though no light was present. Sounds like whispers were heard, though no mouth spoke. These were not mere hallucinations, but part of the trial imposed by the tomb. It sought to know whether the intruder could remain calm, could accept the presence of the inexplicable, or would collapse under the weight of fear, destroying themselves. In this strange and silent way, the tomb became a mirror of the soul. There was no written record of the true form of these trials, for each person faced them differently. Some were tested by overwhelming loneliness, others by visions of their past, and still others by unbearable thirst. Each ordeal seemed tailored to individual weakness. Thus, the greatest terror was not spirits or lingering ghosts, but the reality that the tomb recognized human fragility and manifested it in the most inescapable form. For this reason, many believed the tomb was not merely a repository for the dead, but also a filter determining who was worthy to approach the dark mysteries of ancient Egypt. There were certain moments within the tomb when each step seemed no longer taken in the real world, but within a layer of dream pulsing between reality and illusion. The cold stone walls could still be touched. Yet at times their texture felt like the skin of a living creature, breathing slowly in silence. The floor remained hard, yet there were instants when each step felt like flowing sand, as though the earth beneath the feet had lost its stability. Sounds that had once been mere echoes of one's own steps suddenly shifted into a faint chorus, voicing tones that could not be recognized as language, yet carried the sensation of something speaking directly into the soul. In such a state, one could no longer know whether they walked through a chamber of stone or drifted within a current of dream conjured by the tomb itself. Many ancient wanderers wrote that the tomb possessed the ability to dissolve the boundaries of consciousness, making one uncertain whether they were awake or asleep. Some described walking through the corridor and suddenly finding themselves on the banks of a river, absent from any earthly map. The river was black, silent, its current flowing toward deeper darkness. Others claimed they sat in a small chamber, only to feel the walls slowly shift until the space expanded into a night sky filled with unfamiliar stars. In an instant, they felt no longer a visitor of the tomb, but a traveler across an alien cosmos. Yet, with a blink of an eye, everything returned: the cold stone, the clinging dust, the heavy silence. It was as if the tomb deliberately revealed a glimpse of another world, only to test how far one could endure astonishment. Some accounts grew stranger still, telling of people who heard the voices of their families calling within the tomb, even though those loved ones had long been dead. Others claimed to meet figures they once knew in life, though the faces were blurred and the voices were but whispers. All of this created a threshold-like sensation, as if the realms of dream and waking life were infiltrating each other without boundary. The tomb became a stage where reality and imagination blended into indistinction. No one knew whether the tomb truly held supernatural power to create illusions, or whether those who entered merely unveiled hidden layers of their own minds. Yet it was precisely at this blurred edge that the tomb felt most alive, as though it mocked the human ability to tell the true from the false. Those who emerged from such experiences were seldom the same. They walked through the world with a faint suspicion that what they saw might only be a thin veil over something greater. Some lost faith in the senses, while others became relentless seekers of truth, hoping to find whether what they saw was but dream or, in fact, a message sent from the depths of time. In this way, the tomb did not merely test the steadfastness of the heart, but reshaped the very way a person perceived life. It blurred the line so that those who came out were no longer mere witnesses, but fragments of the mystery itself. The tomb was often regarded not merely as a chamber for bodies and objects, but as a vessel where time no longer moved in a straight line. Instead, it circled, spiraled, and sometimes came to a halt. There were wanderers who testified that when they stood in the deepest chamber, the air felt different, thicker, filled with unseen layers. They claimed to hear whispers from distant ages, voices of people who had died thousands of years ago, still bound to that place. Some said they saw shadows of figures walking through the corridors, clad in ancient Egyptian attire, carrying flickering torches, though the corridors were now empty. These shadows never turned, never spoke, only passed slowly, as if repeating the same step from the past. All of this gave the impression that the tomb was not merely silent stone, but a mechanism storing fragments of time, releasing them at will. But the time preserved within the tomb was not limited to the past. There was a strange account by a medieval traveler who wrote that while he slept inside the tomb, he dreamed of a vast city unknown to his era, filled with glass towers and lights beyond his comprehension. He did not know if it was imagination or a glimpse of the future somehow reflected through the tomb's walls. Even some modern archaeologists, though reluctant to admit it publicly, reported similar experiences. Some dreamt of technologies not yet invented, others of foreign faces speaking languages they could not recognize. This gave rise to the idea that the tomb did not only bind the past, but also opened faint passages into the future. If this were true, then the tomb stood between two poles, serving as a bridge connecting what had been and what might be. Each corridor became a page of a book not written with ink, but inscribed with layers of time itself. Each chamber became a stage where spirits of the past and possibilities of the future mingled yet never fully met. Those who entered stood at the threshold of a world that knew no timeline. They might sense the presence of long-dead pharaohs, while at the same time glimpsing a city yet to be built. They could hear ancient prayers whispered thousands of years ago, and in the next moment hear the hum of machines unknown to ancient Egypt. For some, such experiences were unbearable. Some left the tomb with vacant eyes, no longer able to tell in which time they lived. Others grew obsessive, recording every detail in hopes of finding a pattern that might explain the shifting currents of time. Yet the tomb never offered answers. It revealed fragments only as though mocking humankind with impossible riddles. No one knew whether the tomb truly possessed cosmic power or simply reflected the deepest recesses of the human mind. But one thing was certain: time within was not the same as time outside. And perhaps this was the tomb's darkest secret of all, that it was not only a chamber of death, but also a chamber of time. That it preserved not just bodies, but sparks of the past and shadows of the future. Every person who entered, knowingly or not, walked upon a thin line straddling centuries, brushing against unseen currents of time, carrying back something that could never be explained to the world outside. Sound was perhaps the most mysterious element of the tomb, for it left no trace that could be seen or touched, existing only in the ears and minds of those within. Countless records, from ancient explorers to modern researchers, told of faint whispers echoing in the deepest chambers, particularly in places rarely opened. Some described them as long prayers, spoken in ancient Egyptian tongues long forgotten. Others said they resembled the lament of a woman, soft yet piercing, as if seeping from the cold stone walls. Still others claimed to hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, on sandy floors, though the corridors lay empty and sealed. These sounds came without pattern, unpredictable, often vanishing the moment someone tried to follow them. Archaeologists attempted rational explanations. They suggested the noises might come from shifting stone due to temperature changes or from trapped drafts of air winding through narrow passages. Yet such theories never satisfied witnesses who reported hearing articulate voices, complete with repeated words and phrases resembling incantations. No modern recording device ever captured the sounds clearly. Microphones registered silence or vague murmurs, while human ears swore they heard voices close enough to whisper directly into them. Ancient Egyptian lore spoke of tombs as houses of voices, spirits that never rested. Priests believed every word spoken within sacred chambers was absorbed by the walls, stored by the stone, and later returned as echoes for future generations. Thus, the tomb did not preserve only bodies, but also prayers, cries, and even curses. This may explain why so many tomb diggers felt an irrational dread. They were not merely handling artifacts and bones. They believed they were hearing remnants of the past still alive in sound. One story told of a laborer carving a new passage into a burial complex. He heard a man's voice clearly call his name, spoken with stern authority. Startled, he turned, but no one was there. Assuming it was a prank, he ignored it until the voice came again, closer, whispering almost directly into his ear. Terrified, he fled and never returned to work there. Such accounts repeated across excavation sites, persuading many that these voices served as warnings, signs that the tomb wished not to be disturbed. Others believed the voices were not spirits, but resonances of trapped time. Just as light can be reflected within closed spaces, sound too could linger in stone. Every word uttered in the tomb remained embedded within the walls, waiting for the right moment to resurface. When they reappeared, listeners perceived them as foreign voices, not realizing they were echoes of the past. For those who held this view, the tomb was a library of sound, a place where whispers from thousands of years ago still lingered, waiting for ears bold enough to hear. Whether the explanation lay in spirit or science, one truth was certain: the voices were part of the tomb's enduring mystery. Sounds rising from the darkness could not be ignored. They reminded all who entered that within the tomb lay more than stone and sand. There was life once lived, prayers once spoken, laments once cried, and all of it still reverberated there, waiting in silence for the next listener. If sound could make the skin crawl, then the light appearing in the tomb's darkness inspired both awe and fear. Numerous records, from ancient times to modern archaeology, spoke of faint, inexplicable lights. Witnesses reported seeing a glow like a small torch at the end of a corridor, moving slowly as if carried by invisible hands. Others described a pale blue flash, like a spark of electricity, though no source of energy existed within. The light would appear suddenly, dance across the walls, then vanish as though swallowed by stone. Sometimes it resembled tiny orbs, like fireflies, lost in the underground night. At other times, it appeared as a faint streak across the floor, like a glowing mist drifting without direction. Researchers sought logical explanations. Some suspected phosphorescent minerals in the walls, or pockets of gas reflecting ambient light upon contact with oxygen. Yet no study could reproduce the phenomenon consistently. In controlled experiments, the chambers remained shrouded in darkness. The mysterious glow appeared only unpredictably, often when the room was silent and empty, and always vanished when many entered with lamps. It was as though the light possessed its own will, refusing to be captured, wishing only to reveal itself briefly under certain conditions. In ancient Egyptian lore, light was often regarded as the manifestation of the Ba, the soul's part capable of leaving the body. Kings and queens, it was believed, carried their own lights, which occasionally still wandered through the passages. Such glows were taken as signs that spirits guarded their resting place, ensuring no one disturbed the tomb's peace. Priests even wrote that the flickers were living prayers, transformed into eternal flames within darkness. In this belief, the light was not strange, but natural, as if tombs were destined to host both radiance and shadows side by side. Modern witnesses, however, spoke of deeper impressions. One photographer entered a tomb with full equipment. When his lamp died, leaving him in total darkness, he saw a golden glow floating a few meters ahead, hovering as if waiting. He assumed it might be reflection from his camera, but the device was completely dead. The light drew closer, paused in front of his face, then vanished in an instant. He swore it left him with the sense of being watched not in menace, but in profound sorrow. He left trembling, vowing never to return, though his photographs survived untouched. Guards, too, told of faint lights drifting across corridors at night. Whenever they chased them, the lights faded away. Sometimes they appeared in burial chambers, glimmering across hieroglyphs, making the carvings seem alive, moving, speaking. Some believed the light revealed hidden details, guiding their eyes. Others thought it a warning, a sign that boundaries had been crossed. The mystery of the tomb lights remains unanswered. Whether natural phenomena or the lingering souls of the dead, they transformed tombs into more than mere resting places. They made the stone corridors feel alive, bridging life and death. In every fleeting glow, there seemed a message unspoken, felt only in the heart, that the past still watches the present, and that the tombs never truly sleep. If faint light was often seen as a sign of the soul, then shadows without any source of light were a far stranger riddle. Many accounts spoke of shadows moving along the walls of ancient Egyptian tomb corridors. Even though there were no torches, no lamps, and no other people present, these shadows appeared suddenly, sometimes walking the length of the wall like human figures. Sometimes just fleeting silhouettes. At times, they stretched impossibly tall, covering entire stone surfaces. Other times, they bent forward as if watching those who stood nearby. What made them unsettling was their defiance of logic. A shadow could appear on the right even when the lamp stood on the left, or it might move closer, though the light remained fixed. It was as if the shadow had its own life, detached from the laws of nature we know. For the ancient Egyptians, shadowzor could carry deep meaning. Ku was believed to be a part of the soul that preserved the worldly impression of a person. Shadows were not mere reflections of the body, but the trace of a life once lived. When someone died, the Ku was thought to linger at the tomb, guarding it, wandering its passages, or appearing as a faint outline upon its walls. Thus, seeing a shadow without light was not strange in their belief. It was a sign that the spirit remained, maintaining the balance between the living and the dead. The shadow was a silent witness, ensuring that no one forgot who lay buried behind the stone. To modern visitors, however, such experiences were chilling. One young archaeologist reported seeing another shadow move beside him as he copied hieroglyphs, even though he was alone with a small lamp. The shadow glided across the wall, paused by a carving, and moved again. Thinking a colleague had joined him, he looked around but found only silence and an empty corridor. He felt the hair on his neck rise, as though something stood behind him. When he turned, nothing was there, just the long, dark passage. The shadow was gone, leaving only the uneasy sense of being watched. Guards also told of shadows walking at the far end of the corridor, like wandering figures. As they approached, the shadows retreated, disappearing beyond stone doors. Sometimes the shadows moved across the passage without clear form, no more than a drifting, dark haze. Guards grew accustomed to such occurrences, some even losing all fear. They considered them longtime residents still patrolling their eternal home. Scientists offered explanations. Some suggested optical illusions caused by dim lighting or eyes strained by darkness. Others believed they were reflections from lamps striking certain angles. Yet these theories failed to explain sightings where no light was present at all. Witnesses even claimed the shadows were clearer when all lamps went out, as though they only truly lived in pure darkness. For some, the encounter with these shadows was not frightening, but sorrowful. They described the shadows as if they wished to communicate, yet could not speak. Some felt they simply approached to stand beside them before fading away. The impression left was not of menace, but of profound loneliness, traces of lives once vibrant, now reduced to silhouettes upon tomb walls. The enigma of shadows without light remains unresolved. Whether illusions or genuine signs of spirits, they ensure the corridors are never truly empty. Every wall, carving, and arch seems to carry unseen footsteps. In eternal darkness, these shadows remind us that death is not an ending, but a doorway into another existence, one that still chooses to reveal itself in quiet, fleeting, and mysterious ways. As we begin to enter the deeper layers of the secrets within ancient Egyptian tombs, the greatest question arises: are these phenomena mere tricks of the senses, or true forms of communication from something beyond human reach? Over time, many archaeologists and spiritual researchers have attempted to pierce this veil with different approaches. Some brought modern devices such as motion sensors, low-frequency audio recorders, and infrared cameras, hoping to capture concrete evidence of unseen presences. Yet the results were often puzzling. There were audio recordings of faint breathing in empty corridors. Some cameras caught wisps of gray mist drifting across rooms despite stable air conditions. More startling energy sensors recorded fluctuations at certain points, as if something had passed by unseen. Such evidence never silenced skepticism. Yet it was enough to reignite debates over whether tombs were simply hollow chambers or gateways to something far greater. The ancient Egyptians themselves had always prepared tombs as transitional spaces, not final ends. Walls filled with hieroglyphs and paintings were not mere decorations, but guides for the soul navigating the afterlife. Texts described long roads with gates guarded by half-human, half-animal beings. Others depicted vast landscapes filled with water, fire, and stars. Every detail was inscribed with the belief that the soul would pass through stages toward eternal peace. Thus, when modern phenomena reveal voices, shadows, or energies inside tombs, some see them as proof that the inscriptions were not just symbols, but glimpses of realities still unfolding. Yet for others, these experiences evoke indescribable dread. Imagine standing alone in a stone chamber sealed for millennia. Damp air and the scent of ancient rocks around you. Suddenly, a faint dragging sound like cloth across the floor reaches your ears. You turn, but the passage is empty. Or imagine shining a flashlight on a hieroglyph, only to hear a fleeting whisper in an unknown language, quick as wind, gone before you can trace its source. Was it imagination, or the voices of souls still guarding their final messages? Stories from local workers guarding the tombs add further depth. Many claim to dream of figures dressed in white with veiled faces, signaling them not to go too far into the corridors. Sometimes the dreams repeated until the guards felt they were more than mere illusions of sleep. Others spoke of hearing their names called from behind sealed stone doors, though no one else was inside. Ignoring it only made the voice grow clearer, as though pleading for attention. Strangely, despite the fear, there was no sense of harm. Instead, there was sadness, like someone begging not to be forgotten. Viewed with calmer perspective, perhaps all this can be seen as symbolic messages from the past. Tombs were not just resting places for bodies, but vessels of memory. Faint sounds, shifting shadows, or recurring dreams may simply be the subconscious grasping the weight of history's resonance. Stones imbued with prayers, carvings filled with spells, and chambers heavy with emotional energy from millennia, a gall of these form an atmosphere that presses upon the mind and opens imagination. In that blurred line between reality and illusion, mystery thrives, reminding anyone who enters that there is something larger than themselves, still pulsing in the silence of the tombs. The deeper we wander through the imagined corridors of ancient tombs, the more we sense that these spaces are not merely stone constructions built by human hands, but vessels of energy holding echoes of millennia. Picture a tomb whose walls are covered with paintings, once vivid colors, now faded into shadows, yet still exuding an aura of grandeur that defies explanation. When flashlight beams reveal the details, we see figures lined up, bearing offerings, bowing before gods with human faces and animal bodies. These are not merely ritual records, but instructions, a map for the soul to navigate the corridors of darkness. It is here we feel that every carving is a kind of spell still working, even though its sculptors vanished thousands of years ago. Like prayers that never cease vibrating, the space feels alive with something subtle, unseen, yet palpable when one grows quiet enough. There is a tale among researchers about a chamber known as the Echo Room. Inside it, the slightest sound multiplies into a chorus of whispers. Some believe the chamber was deliberately designed to create such acoustic effects, giving the illusion that ancestral spirits were speaking from beyond the walls. This is supported by the discovery of small cavities carved into stone, functioning like resonators to channel sound. Yet others are convinced the extra voices heard there are not mere echoes, but something else. One local worker claimed to hear faint singing, resembling ancient chants, emerging even though no one was speaking. The song lasted briefly before vanishing, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. Viewed with a modern lens, one might argue such spaces were designed to alter human consciousness. Sound waves, dim light, the fragrance of incense once burned inside. These created conditions where the mind hovered between waking and dream. In that state, one could experience transcendence, feeling in the presence of something greater. Ancient Egypt, with its architectural mastery, seemed to fully understand this spiritual psychology and used it to bridge the living with the dead, the mortal with the eternal. And yet, not everything can be explained. Some archaeologists reported sudden temperature drops at certain points, as if a cold wind passed through sealed chambers with no openings. Others spoke of flashlights dimming when aimed at carvings of deities, then brightening once moved away. Such phenomena may appear minor, yet to those who experienced them, they carried an eerie sense of interaction beyond logic. Was it coincidence or evidence that the tombs remained guarded by unseen forces? In the end, the greatest mystery is not about spirits or gods, but about the tombs themselves, continuing to speak. They speak through silence, through atmosphere, through shadows shifting on walls, through whispers never fully captured. All of this makes us wonder whether the tomb's secrets concern life after death or humanity's memory that refuses to vanish. For each time we enter and listen, it feels as if we face not only stone chambers, but layers of time still pulsing, calling us to remember that some truths will never be entirely understood. In the silence of ancient tombs, one thing always emerges: the sense that time does not flow as we know it. Each step on the stone floor feels like entering a space no longer bound to clocks or calendars. The stones, having absorbed thousands of years of stillness, seem to possess memories of their own. When we touch their surfaces, cold and rough, we realize that other human hands diggers, priests, workers once touched the same stones thousands of years ago. That moment binds us to them, not through written history, but through something far more personal, a touch that crosses millennia. Imagine an ancient procession, priests walking with incense, the sound of small bells ringing and low chanting echoing through the corridor. They guide the soul of a pharaoh toward eternal rest, passing walls inscribed with spells. Now we stand in that same chamber, but all of it is gun-only shadows remain. Strangely, even though every person from that procession has long vanished, the space still feels full, as if their footsteps never truly faded. It is as though the walls held on to those sounds and released them as faint whispers to anyone brave enough to enter. Some ancient texts suggest tombs were not merely places to keep bodies, but gateways for the soul to connect with another world. Here occurred the meeting between the living and the dead, between humans and gods. No wonder the architecture was crafted with such precision. Every corner, every corridor, even every pocket of air was designed to create a certain balance. It is as if the tomb was not just a space, but a vast instrument played by time. And when we stand within it, we become part of that melody, never fully knowing what song is being performed. To some, a tomb is merely an archaeological relic. To others, it is a mirror. When we gaze at its painted walls, we do not only see the stories of the dead, but also the same questions that haunt humanity. What happens after all this ends? The question is never truly answered, but the tomb offers a quiet whisper that humans always seek meaning, even in death. There is a tale of a young archaeologist who wandered too deep into a tomb and became lost for hours. He swore that during his ordeal, he heard the voice of a child calling him again and again, though no one was there. That voice guided him until he found the way out. Once outside, he discovered ancient carvings showing a child holding a torch, leading souls through darkness. Perhaps it was coincidence, perhaps not. Yet the story reinforced the idea that tombs do not only hold bodies but living memories, waiting for the right moment to speak. And when we leave the tomb, stepping back into the blinding sunlight, we carry with us something unseen, the feeling that the world is far wider, deeper, and more mysterious than we can ever understand. A tomb is not merely a relic of the past. It is a reminder that even within silence and darkness, stories continue to breathe, refusing to be forgotten. When we try to understand the tombs of ancient Egypt, we often get trapped in technical details. how long the corridors are, how large the chambers, how many tons of stone were used to build them. But if we pause for a moment and let ourselves drift into the atmosphere created by the space, we begin to realize that what matters most is not the physical scale, but the symbolism embedded in every stone and painting. Every carved line, every color of paint, every shape of hieroglyph carries meaning intertwined with the rhythm of the society that built it. They were not merely constructing a place to keep a body, but creating a miniature universe where everything was arranged so that the soul could continue its journey unhindered. On the tomb walls, we often find images of the Nile flowing, boats sailing, and gardens full of plants. These are not mere decorations, but symbolic maps guiding the soul into the next world. The Nile was seen as the heart of life, so it is no wonder it was also viewed as the pathway to eternity. The boats painted on the walls were not just vessels, but spiritual crafts carrying the soul across cosmic waters to the realm of Osiris. In this way, every detail that may seem simple to modernize was in fact an instruction, a kind of manual for the journey of the soul. The objects found in the tombs speak the same message. There are dried foods, jars of oils, jewelry, and even toys for children. These were not placed simply to accompany the body, but to ensure continued existence in the next world. Death was seen as a mere change of dwelling. One left a house full of light to move into a house of darkness, bringing supplies to avoid want. We can imagine a mother placing her child's toy in the tomb, hoping that child might still play in the afterlife, or a craftsman carving a miniature boat with perfect detail so that his master could sail through the realm of spirits. All this reflects a deep belief that death was not an ending, but a door to another adventure. What is striking is that this symbolism served not only the dead, but also the living. When a community carved walls with tales of the soul's journey, they were also rewriting their own faith. Each funeral rite was a reminder that life on earth was temporary and that something greater awaited beyond. In this sense, the tomb functioned as a double mirror. It preserved hope for the dead while also teaching awareness to the living. It is no wonder that ancient Egyptians so meticulously preserved their funerary rituals. For within them lay a soothing promise that life had continuity, that darkness did not truly mean the end. Yet behind all this symbolism lies a shadow that cannot be ignored. The making of tombs often involved the forced labor of thousands, many of whom died during construction. Their bodies may never have been buried with ceremony, yet somehow their toil and suffering also became part of the tomb itself. Every stone may bear the trace of sweat, blood, and tears of those never named in official records. So when we admire the beautiful paintings on the walls, there is another hidden layer. The stories of those who were never immortalized, but without whom that beauty would not exist. Perhaps this is the greatest irony of Egyptian tombs. On one hand, they are monumental works of art, full of spiritual meaning. Spaces where symbolism and faith blend to overcome the fear of death. On the other hand, they are monuments of human suffering, the result of labor that was not always voluntary. These two sides cannot be separated, and perhaps therein lies the mystery. That each tomb is a fusion of hope and sorrow, of beautiful prayers and unheard cries. And when we stand within them, we can feel both, not through words, but through long, profound silence. The deeper we trace the story of Egypt's tombs, the clearer it becomes that they were not merely containers for bodies, but stages for encounters between the human world and the divine. Some ancient texts mention that certain tombs were seen as gateways where the spirit of the deceased could meet the gods directly, or at least send their prayers through the hieroglyphs and symbols carved into the walls. Imagine a silent chamber underground, lit only by the dim glow of torches, its walls filled with carvings of prayers and spells. For those who lived thousands of years ago, such a room was not simply storage, but a secret hall of audience. A place where the soul could sit face to face with Osiris, speak with Anubis, or step into the Iktomis court where the human heart was weighed against the feather of truth. The Egyptians believed that a soul never walked alone. Rituals allowed the living to help the dead along their path. Priests recited spells, families brought offerings, and sometimes visitors came to the tomb years after burial to leave bread, beer, or lotus flowers. These were not just gestures of affection, but means of communication. Each loaf placed on the altar, each drop of oil poured, was considered a message that the spirit could receive. Thus, the tomb became a channel of two-way communication between the living and the dead, though the messages sent were never answered in words, only in profound silence. Some larger tombs even contained special offering chambers. Here, statues were placed, representing the presence of the spirit or deity, and people could speak as if the statues truly heard them. On certain nights, perhaps accompanied by the sound of flutes or soft chanting, rituals were performed in the belief that the doorway between worlds might open. One can imagine the atmosphere, air heavy with incense, torchlight flickering on the walls, and prayers whispered with reverence. No one truly knew if the door ever opened, but the silence of the chamber was often enough to make anyone feel that something greater, something unexplainable, was there. The symbols on the walls reinforced this belief. There were images of the Eye of Horus gazing sharply, hieroglyphs describing journeys through the Duat, the underworld filled with gates and guardians. Each symbol was not written merely to be read, but to be activated. When a priest recited a spell before the hieroglyph, the words seemed to ignite the images, opening their own pathways in the realm of spirits. Thus, the tomb walls were not static, but alive, functioning as ritual instruments connecting the two realms. The mystery deepens when we realize that some tombs show signs of repeated use, as if people returned not only to honor, but to commune. There are traces of candles, shards of vessels, and small inscriptions scribbled by trembling hands. Most of these are simple short prayers or names left behind, but they suggest that the tomb was never fully closed. It remained an open space, though hidden in the earth's belly. Imagine a young man who lost his father, coming to the tomb years after the burial. He brings a piece of bread and a jar of beer, sits before a small statue, and speaks softly. Perhaps he asks for guidance. Perhaps he simply pours out his longing. No voice replies, only the crackle of the torch, yet somehow he feels heard. Or an old woman who lost her child, arriving with a lotus flower, placing it on the altar, and quietly weeping. All of this shows that the tomb was not only a place for the dead, but a refuge for the living. A silent chamber where grief could be eased by the belief in unseen communication. Perhaps this is one reason why Egypt's tombs still feel alive even after being abandoned for millennia. For within them are layers of emotions, prayers, and beliefs etched into every carving and object. Not only spirits dwell there, but also the traces of footsteps of those who once came with hopeful hearts. The tomb became an archive of silence, preserving conversations never heard yet still present, layered like whispers clinging to stone. And when we stand within them today, though the rituals have long ceased, we may still sense their vibration, faint, elusive, but enough to remind us that we are never truly alone there. The deeper we walk through the corridors of ancient Egypt, the more we feel that tombs do not only preserve sacred stories and peaceful rituals, but also dark tales swirling in silence. There are faint records from Greek and Roman travelers mentioning spirits that haunted the tombs, not peaceful spirits, but restless ones, as if bound to the stone walls that held their remains. Some believed these souls never managed to pass through the gates of the Duat, stuck between worlds, waiting for something that would never arrive. In the dark chambers, lit only by torches, such visions seem plausible, for the crushing silence often lets human imagination grow into something larger than reality. Imagine standing in a long passageway, the air heavy and cold, and suddenly hearing a faint whisper. No one knows whether it is merely wind creeping through cracks or something else, something older than human speech. From the same silence emerge the stories of tomb curses. Many know the legend of Tutankhamun's curse, how several members of the excavation team died mysteriously after opening the young king's tomb. Although modern historians often attribute this to bacteria, toxins, or coincidence, the story of the curse endures, because it touches something deeper than scientific explanation. It touches an instinctive dread that some places should remain untouched, some rooms forever locked. And ancient Egypt is full of such rooms, corridors built not to be seen again, but to remain hidden for eternity. In some tombs, hieroglyphs even record warnings. One inscription states that whoever disturbs the king's sleep will soon be embraced by death. Another proclaims that the intruder's body will be destroyed and his soul will never find peace. These warnings were not written with drama, but with a cold, flat tone, as if noting a law of nature that cannot be broken. For the Egyptians, death was not an end, but a journey, and to disturb that journey was to disturb the cosmic order. Thus, the curse was not merely a threat, but a reflection of the belief that balance must be preserved, even by silent stone. Imagine a tomb robber thousands of years ago, moving slowly with a small torch, searching for gold or jewels. He may laugh at the carved warnings, dismissing them as decoration. But when he returns to the surface with stolen treasure, perhaps his body begins to fail, or tragedy befalls his loved ones. Was it coincidence? The effect of toxic air sealed for centuries, or a true curse at work? No one knows. What is clear is that such stories persisted, passed from generation to generation, until tomb curses became part of our collective shadow. What is even more striking is how the curse outlived Egypt, crossing into other cultures. When the story reached Europe, it evolved into Gothic tales of vengeful spirits, eventually becoming part of modern imagination through films, novels, and popular legends. Yet, if we return to the roots, to the silent stone corridors, we realize that all of this began with tomb silence, with the awe humans feel when standing before something older than their own civilization. Behind all these tales, the Egyptian tombs remain symbols of ambivalence. They are shelters, yet threats. Archives of prayers, yet fields of fear. Spaces of calm, yet tension, because humans never truly know what lies beyond their walls. Each step inside carries a double feeling, both wonder and dread, curiosity and the urge to retreat. And perhaps that is why their mystery endures, because they never truly give answers, only silence full of meaning, leaving humans to decide for themselves whether they are hearing the echo of spirits or merely the wind moving through the dark passage. In the end, when all the stories of curses, spirits, and silence are combined, the ancient Egyptian tomb feels like a mirror reflecting both the dark and bright sides of human existence. They were built with extraordinary devotion, stone by stone, carved with the belief that what was left in the mortal world would sustain the journey toward eternity. Yet within the silence of those long corridors, we also realize that the tombs preserve something deeper. Something not inscribed in hieroglyphs or prayers, human fear of disconnection, of loss of meaning, of the absence of a definite end. Thus, the tomb is not only a monument to kings, but also a monument to human dread, carved into layered chambers of stone. Imagine for a moment standing before the cold wall of a tomb, torchlight dancing slowly across carvings that tell the story of the soul's journey. There is the figure of the god Anubis, the scales weighing the heart, the river dividing the worlds, Zal depicting the hope that after death there would be justice. Yet behind it lies something uncarved, uncertainty. Perhaps the stone carvers felt the same, that even as they wrote prayers, even as they copied spells, there remained an empty gap that could not be filled. That gap makes the tomb not merely a sacred space, but also an endless chamber of mystery. The Egyptian tombs also remind us that civilizations always leave ambiguous traces. On one hand, they are a celebration of human achievement, how a society could mobilize thousands of workers, build colossal monuments, write thousands of intricate texts, all to safeguard the journey of the soul. On the other, they reveal limitations, for not one king, no matter how mighty, escaped ruin. Many tombs were found looted, bodies missing, treasures gone, prayers surviving only as inscriptions on stone. Even the most powerful pharaohs could not protect their remains from human hands or from the current of time. When we reflect on all this, the Egyptian tombs become an endless chamber of contemplation. They speak not only of death, but also of life, of how humans try to understand their place in the cosmos. They are archives of fear and archives of hope. Every stone laid, every symbol carved, was an effort to overcome human limitation, to reassure themselves that something would endure, even if they would not. Yet precisely because of this, the tombs are full of paradox. They are attempts to achieve eternity, and yet what we see today are fragile remnants of that dream. And within that paradox, the mystery of the tombs lives on. They are never fully explained, never completely interpreted. Even as modern archaeology deciphers detail after detail measuring stone ages, analyzing pigments, rereading ancient texts, there always remains an empty space untouched. That emptiness is the silence that envelops, making those who stand inside the tomb feel small. Feel that something larger, older, and quieter than all our knowledge exists. Thus, the ancient Egyptian tombs are not merely historical relics. They are eternal reminders that humans always live between two sides, between light and dark, between hope and dread, between knowledge and mystery. Each tomb is a half-open door, giving us a glimpse into the minds of the ancients while tightly guarding much of their secrets. And for that very reason, the tombs remain stories that continue to resonate, never fading, for they speak not only of the past, but of us, of our endless curiosity, our unending fears, and the silence that always lingers behind every life. And now we arrive at the end of this long journey, sitting in silence as if time has stopped between shadow and light. The ancient Egyptian tombs we have explored offer no definitive answers, only faint echoes that circle endlessly in the mind, like the sound of wind passing through underground corridors. Perhaps therein lies the greatest beauty of the tombs, that they do not exist to provide certainty, but to offer a gentle reminder that humans are small creatures always, searching for meaning, even while knowing that meaning can never truly be found. And because of this, the tomb is not only a resting place for the body, but also a chamber of dreams for anyone who stands before it. Imagine a quiet night on the edge of the desert, the sky filled with dim stars, and in the distance stands a stone doorway cracked by time. The desert wind drifts slowly, carrying grains of sand that slip into the crevices of stone, as if trying to cover the traces left thousands of years ago. There are no sounds, no footsteps, only silence wrapping everything like a soft blanket. If someone were to stand there, perhaps they would feel as though the world were holding its breath, letting them sink into empty seconds. And within that emptiness, a question would arise without words: do the spirits once buried here still dwell, or are they only faint shadows clinging to the walls? The Egyptian tomb is like a bedtime story read softly in the stillness of night. There are tales of gods, curses, treasures, and journeys of the soul, yet all are told in a slow rhythm with long pauses, with a flat tone that lulls the listener to sleep while imagining stone corridors. Every detail we have explored throughout this journey is only a fragment of that tale, never complete, always leaving space for imagination. Thus, when we close our eyes, the story of the tomb continues within the dream. A faint current carrying us across deserts, across rivers, across a world without boundaries between life and death. And at the end of it all, we are left with a feeling that is never truly finished. There is no definite conclusion, no absolute truth. There is only the calm that comes from accepting that mystery is meant to remain mystery, that some doors are never fully opened, some questions never answered, some secrets never revealed. Just as the night always returns, just as the stars continue to flicker, the ancient Egyptian tombs will always stand as a reminder that the world holds more than we can ever understand. So let this story close like a lullaby, long and unhurried. not demanding us to understand, but simply asking us to be still and to feel. Let the tomb remain in the silence of the desert. Let the spirits who rest stay where they are. Let the mystery breathe softly, without disturbance. We need only walk away slowly, glance back one last time, and let the shadow of the stone doorway dissolve into the darkness of night. And when our eyes finally close, the tomb will remain, not as an answer, but as a gentle echo, as a faint whisper guarding our sleep, letting us rest in the embrace of a mystery that never fades.